Hello, everyone. Tonight, I have a special treat for you. I will be interviewing a close friend and someone I trust enough to know my secret location. She is Nevermore Hollow's coroner. She gets up close and personal with the carnage that the evil beings leave behind as they prey upon the townsfolk. She helps me in my endeavors to document the eerie and sometimes unspeakable things that happen in this seemingly quiet little town. Tonight, she is going to help us dissect a very dark incident that happened recently with some kids here in town. So, with that, I ask that you sit back, turn on a light, and prepare yourself. So, I guess we can just start with you introducing yourself.
Well, I am Elissa Heart. I've been the coroner here in Nevermore for almost 25 years. I moved here hoping to find some peace and quiet, but I was so wrong. My first night on the job was so strange that I decided right then and there that I would probably die here.
And that would probably be on the job, right?
Yeah, probably. I've had some close calls over the years. My first night on the job, it was so strange. That's the first time that I ever met Granny Dingo, and I still have those scars.
Anybody that meets Granny Dingo is going to come away with scars.
Yeah.
But, I think I want to have you back on another night to talk about that, because I'm sure it's going to be a wild story. But tonight, I want to talk to you about what you've been calling the Grace Macabre incident.
Yeah, I know you've written a book about that too. When's it going to be released?
We're shooting for the fall. The story is written and edited, and we're waiting on the cover art. And I'm eager to tell that story.
Don't you just love her name, Grace Macabre?
It's pretty awesome. Look, everybody here in Nevermore Hollows has such odd, awesome names, but hers is definitely one of my favorites. So, if you would, tell me about how you got involved in Grace's paranormal adventure.
Okay, so I think that you know Haley Madison, right?
I do.
Okay, so obviously she and I have spent lots of time together, considering she's the homicide detective here in Nevermore. And so she and I have stood over a number of just bodies that have been torn apart and stuff that's done by human hands that you can't imagine. And we've also performed autopsies on a lot of non-human entities.
So, all right, so let me stop you there. You and Haley Madison, the homicide detective here in Nevermore Hollows, you're claiming that you both have seen and touched things that are non-human entities. What does that mean? Monsters? Aliens?
Oh, never aliens. At least not yet. I do have a bold claim to make, though. I have autopsied creatures that are clearly not human, and I know they are from the dark realm.
A dark realm?
Well, where else could it be coming from?
Well, I mean, that kind of depends. What kinds of things have you autopsied?
Well, that actually leads us right up to what I'm about to tell you.
Okay, all right. So go ahead. Look, this is fascinating, but for the record, I just want everybody to know, if you know me and you've been listening to this podcast for any time at all, you know that I do believe that there's a dark realm.
Absolutely. Well, let me tell you, I got a call a few nights ago from Haley. It was around 2 a.m. She asked me to meet her at my office to make sure that we would be alone also, because of the things that we discuss has to be, kept secret. Mm-hmm. So she said that she was bringing me some bodies to look at.
All right, so I have to ask, after you look at these non-human entity or monster bodies, what do you do with them?
Well, as the coroner, I have access to the crematorium. It's actually right in my lab. So we cremate the bodies after we autopsy and document them.
Okay, so why don't you alert the authorities?
Well, Haley is the authorities, but I get what you're asking. And we do. Sheriff Mosley knows, and the mayor.
Okay, so, those are good folks. They're in the know. They understand the dark secrets that happen here in Nevermore Hollows. But I guess my question actually is why don't you alert the higher authorities?
Come on, Lafayette. I know you don't trust the government to play nice. They'd swoop in, confiscate the bodies, and all we'd know is that things disappeared and nobody had any knowledge of anything.
Yeah, and we would probably disappear as well. So I figured that would be your answer. But I just wanted to get that kind of on record.
Yeah. Okay. So I met Haley around 2:30 that morning. She had 7 bodies in the back of her truck under a tarp. I helped her unload them and bring them into the lab. We then began the autopsies.
Now, these bodies, they were non-human, as you like to say.
Yes. We've had some others in the past. Usually in situations like these, it's only one body. But this time she brought me 7.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. 5 were the same type of creature. Then there was 2 completely different from the first 5. So basically that night, she brought me 7 bodies that represented what I'd like to say are 3 different classifications of beasts.
That is fascinating. So, for the sake of keeping the terminology simple as we progress, let's just call them what they are. They're monsters.
Well, I'm okay with that. Though I have made it my goal to document and classify as many of them as I can possibly can. Some don't fit into the normal monster mythology, but some do.
You mean, when you say monster mythology, you mean like werewolves and vampires?
Nothing here in Nevermore is that clear-cut. What I mean is that some of the monsters can fit into normal monster stereotypes, but they just aren't normal. For example, I've seen some monsters here who do feed on blood of humans, but beyond that fact, they are just vampiric in nature. They act and look nothing like normal vampires. I mean, it's the same with werewolves. I've personally witnessed a human transform into a beast that closely represented a werewolf, but it was much more than what fiction would lead us to believe.
Now, I'm going to have you come back to speak about that at some point in the future.
Oh, anytime.
I mean, a human transformation into something monstrous. We're going to have to know that. So anyway, continue, please.
Okay, so the first monster I dissected was one of the 5 that all resembled each other. Or, to use the scientific language, they were all of the same class.
All right. So I'm following what you're trying to do. And what would that be?
They're hybrid snakes.
Okay. So what you mean to say is that they were human-like and snake-like at the same time. So what are we talking about here? Reptilians?
Well, yes, but not in the sense of what the conspiracy theory whack jobs call reptilians. These were just more disturbing. They had bodies of humans that were covered in snake-like scales. Their necks were thick and elongated, as if they weren't really necks, but snake bodies that had grown from their torso. These necks ended with massive snake heads covered in scales.
All right, so, my skin is literally crawling at hearing that description. So I'm curious. I know you're a doctor and all that, but how can you bring yourself to touch something that is so repulsive?
I have to admit, it was not easy. Anyway, there were these 3 males and 2 females. We put the first one on the autopsy table. So, she was about 5 feet tall. Her scales were scarlet in color. She had slitted pupils, and when I opened her mouth, she had these tiny needle-like teeth and a hinged jaw that could dislocate and open up. I mean, just humongous.
Oh no, that's terrible.
Yeah, I mean, I've never seen anything like it. She also had these 2 fangs that collapsed back when her mouth was closed. These fangs did attach to poisonous sacs, though, but the poison was like nothing that I had ever seen or documented in a snake before.
Wow, that's pretty fascinating. All right, so keep on. All right.
Okay, so when we finished with that one, the next one was a male. He was massive. I mean, he was over 6 feet tall, jet black, red eyes. His neck was thick and muscular, and it rose a good 3 or 4 feet above its shoulders. If this thing extended to its neck to its full length, it would have been almost 9 feet tall. I mean, it was completely terrifying.
Okay. Yeah, I can't imagine having to face off against something like that. But how did these things die? If they're so overwhelming and terrifying, how did they die?
Well, some of them were shot and some of them were stabbed.
By whom?
Well, Haley, for one.
She fought these things.
Well, yeah, she did, along with the kids.
Okay, these kids. So Haley Madison and these kids fought these things and won. Okay, so we've got to flesh that out. So it was Grace McCobb and whom else?
Okay, so it was Grace, and she had her 2 friends, Ian Black and Sarah Graves. And beyond that, Haley has kept the details close to her chest who else was involved.
Okay, I gotcha. So was there anything special about this giant snake thing? Anything else?
Well, I didn't find any poisonous fangs, which I kind of thought was odd, but the next 2 that I looked at were also male. One was pale yellow, almost like it was some albino snake. The last one was the most interesting to me, though.
Okay.
It had scales and markings of a rattlesnake.
A rattlesnake?
Yeah, and it was bigger than the second. And it did have fangs that were poisonous.
Okay, so these things were covered in scales. They had snake-like heads and markings like snakes would, but you think they were something more than just half snake, half human. Why is that?
Well, it's because of what I found when I cut them open. It was the weirdest thing I'd ever done. They had arms and legs and torsos like us, but they were clearly defined snake heads, and they were covered in scales, but had not one organ that looked human or snake-like when I cut them open.
Okay, that's fascinating.
And their blood was thick and black, and it was a gooey black substance that had very disturbing properties.
Okay, so you're saying they didn't have human-like organs, and this blood was thick and black and gooey. So what kind of organs did you find?
Well, that's the strangest part. There was a heart, but it was neither human nor snake. It was something I'd never seen before. The muscle that made up the hearts were thicker than human heart muscle, and they were covered in these odd-looking polyps. Each heart had about a dozen of these polyps.
Okay, but they weren't polyps, were they?
No, they weren't polyps.
What were they?
Well, the first cadaver that I cut open was the large black one. When I opened up its chest and saw the heart and that it was covered in these polyps, I attempted to use the scalpel to cut it free from the chest. However, when I touched the heart, the polyps burst open, revealing that they were eyes.
Eyes? More snake eyes with slit pupils?
No, these were not snake eyes.
Go on.
They were human eyes.
Human.
Yes.
So, when they popped open, what did you do?
What did I do? Well, I nearly had a heart attack. It scared the crap out of me. They were open wide, glaring wildly around. Then they settled on me, and that's when it really got weird.
Okay, so now what you're saying is what happens next is so far-fetched that it makes everything up to this point seem almost normal.
Well, yes. Let me tell you, and you decide for yourself.
Okay.
I gasped and jumped back. my blood turning cold when they popped open and started ogling about. I was afraid that maybe these snake creatures weren't actually dead. Haley pulled her gun out, ready to shoot the one we were working on if it moved. We both shot fearful glances at the wall coolers where the other cadavers were stored, half expecting them to throw open the doors and start back and come out and slither and attack us.
Okay, but that didn't happen, correct?
No, but what did happen was just as bad. We turned our attention back to the cadaver we were working on. The heart began to pulse and squirm. Clearly, it was alive, even though the snake cadaver was not. To our horror, it sprouted these fat, hairy legs, like the legs of a tarantula, and it just crawled right out of the cavity.
Okay, that's okay. All right, so the heart pops open with all these eyes, and it grows spider legs, and it crawls out of the body.
Yeah, I know. Sounds crazy, right?
Yeah, well, anywhere but Nevermore.
Well, yeah. Well, Haley and I both just jumped back, but both of us were just too shocked to react. I mean, how do you react to something like that?
For real, yeah.
It was so repulsive that we wanted to run, but we just couldn't. We were just frozen. So we thought, we've got to kill this thing. It's alive. We've just got to kill it.
Okay, so what happened next?
Well, it crawled out of the cadaver's stomach and from the top of the heart, at least that's what I'm going to call it for right now, for simplicity's sake, there was this long tongue that protruded. And off of this tongue, there were rows and rows of sharp, needle-like teeth.
Oh, okay.
So, it just jumps at us, and it barely missed us. Haley fired off a shot, but she missed it.
Okay.
The thing was just so fast. So it fell to the floor, it skittered away, and just clamped onto Haley's shoe.
Okay, all right. So did Haley get bitten?
No, thankfully. But it was clinging to her shoe. So she just kept trying to flick it off and kick at it, but it just held on. And so I just did the first thing I thought of. I just stabbed it with my scalpel.
All right, cool. Did you kill it?
No, not at first. It made this weird hissing sound. But the scalpel was just stuck into it, and it just started running after me.
Okay.
But Haley just was able to get off a good shot then. I mean, I was just so overwhelmed by this thing. And
okay, so she shoots it.
She does. And then there's this black, gooey mess just went everywhere, and it smelled like sulfur.
Okay. So she kills it, she shoots it, it explodes, and you're saying it smelled like sulfur as in that fire and brimstone kind of thing?
Absolutely.
Okay, so I have to ask, was it easy to clean up?
No, it took a while. It was stuck to everything, and it seemed to have this mild acidic properties. It was like slowly eating away the floor tiles and then the walls where it splattered. It was the craziest thing I've seen.
Okay. All right, so you've shot this monster within a monster, and it's now splattered with this acidic black goo on the floor and the walls. What happens next?
Well, we decided right then and there, Haley and I, that we just couldn't cut another one of these things open without making sure it wasn't dead, because of that heart. So what we decided to do was open up the coolers one by one, and we put a bullet through each cadaver's heart.
Well, that's smart. Did it work?
It did.
Good. Okay. So, we could talk all night about these snake things, but time is getting short, and I want to talk about the other two bodies that Haley brought you. Those were very different from the first 5, but they're also different from human as well, correct?
Yes, they were. The next one was another male. He was shorter than the others, and he clearly was human in appearance, except that he had the face of a cat and was covered in thick fur. He had claw hands instead of real hands, and he had these really sharp cat-like teeth.
What kind of cat?
It resembled a caracal. This is a kind of feral cat in India, and they look kind of like a cougar, but they have these large black eyes and long pointed ears that stick up almost like bat ears.
That sounds freakish.
Yeah, they are freakish looking. But when you see a face and ears and teeth like that on what is supposed to be a human, it stirs up all kinds of disturbing feelings.
I can imagine. All right, so what did you find when you autopsied him?
Well, on the inside, he looked completely human. At least at first glance, his organs and skeletal system all looked human. But when I took samples of his blood and his bone and muscle tissues and looked at them underneath the microscope, I saw that the cells showed evidence of like rapid growth.
Okay, so what did you take that to mean?
Well, I think that he was a man who shape-shifted into this cat-like monster.
Okay. Shape-shifting into a werecat. I've never heard anything like that.
Well, I've heard of them in an ancient lore, but on a side note, since I started seeing all this craziness after I moved here to Nevermore, I immersed myself into some of the lore and the myths and ancient cultures. So I'm kind of like a self-taught expert in that field.
Gotcha.
To answer your question.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, I think it was a werecat.
All right, so here's probably the question of the night. Do you know who he was in human form?
No, unfortunately he had no fingerprints in the werecat form, and I ran the DNA through the system, but it came back with no match because it was possibly corrupted. I suppose it was because it was cat DNA.
That makes sense. Okay, so with the rapid growth that you take to be evidence of him metamorphosing from a man into this werecat monster, did you test the bone and the blood and the muscle of the snake monsters?
Yes, and it showed evidence of the ability to change.
Okay, that's fascinating. But it brings us to the final body. And you told me earlier that this body was the most disturbing of the 7.
It was.
Even more disturbing than snake hybrids and werecats and hearts that grow legs and chase after you?
Yeah, hard to believe, right?
Well, in Nevermore, I don't know. Okay, so go ahead.
Okay, so I'll have to admit that the heart was pretty terrifying and disturbing. I'll say this, the snake hybrids and the werecat, that kind of thing we've seen before, in movies, conspiracy theories, stuff like that. But what makes this last body even more disturbing is because out of everything that I've ever researched or heard of, I've never come across anything resembling this thing. I'm telling you, I was just grossed out, and my skin just crawls thinking about it.
Okay, then, spit it out. What was it?
I just honestly don't know what to call it, really. I'll just explain it this way. It was 5.5 foot long centipede.
Okay, well, that doesn't sound so bad.
Right. But it's Nevermore, right?
Good point. Okay.
Okay, so it was completely covered in human skin.
Human skin.
Yep.
So it's 5.5 feet long, laying on your table, and it looks kind of like a centipede, but it's covered in human skin.
And it had no eyes.
Okay.
None. And so, I walked around, I was looking at it, and it had these fleshly nubs that were also covered in human skin. It was
so those nubs, was that like its feet?
Yeah, it kind of was what it looked like. It walked around on these little nubs.
Okay.
All right, so it weighed about 150 pounds, and it had no eyes, but it had this large slit that looked like a human lip from which protruded a fat black tongue.
Okay.
The tongue was rough and sandpaper-like, and it had the ability to just shred anything and everything that it touched. If it had licked like a regular beast, it would have peeled the skin off of bodies.
Okay, that's the stuff of nightmares.
Oh, and I'm not doing justice on how I'm describing this thing. It was different than anything I've ever seen.
Okay. I can imagine. All right, so did you even attempt to autopsy this thing?
We did. We tried, and it was very difficult. I found that the human skin completely covered a hard black shell, like what you would find on a beetle.
Okay.
It was hard and it required me to use a very sharp saw. But I knew that I could use that because one of the kids had killed it hit it in the head, and that's how it died.
Hit it in the head with what?
It hit it with a tire iron.
Okay, so the tire iron was able to break this hard shell under this human skin.
Yes.
Okay, so what did you find when you cut into this thing?
It was disgusting. I mean, it had no real organs at all. It was filled with this thick, brown, gooey mucus. I can't explain how this thing was really living. I mean, how it was a living thing. It makes no sense. I honestly think the thing was just kept alive by evil and dark magic.
Okay. So I suppose we're at the end of the interview, and I have a couple of final questions.
Okay.
First, where are the bodies now?
I cremated all of them.
Okay. All right. Were there any problems with that?
No, they all burned and left nothing but ash.
What have you done with the ash?
I will not say.
Okay. So why not? You didn't scatter them about somewhere?
No, I couldn't take that risk. You know, they all burned easily enough, and I believe that fire is the ultimate destroyer. But I just couldn't get past
you couldn't take the risk.
Yeah, the fear that the ash could have some kind of different properties that could cause anybody else any problems. I couldn't take that risk.
Okay. So have you tested those ashes in any way?
No. I think it's best that I just keep them locked away in a secret place. Not even Haley knows what I've done with them.
That's probably the safest thing to do.
Yeah, I believe that is.
Okay. So my final question, why tell your story? What is it that you've learned from this incident, and what do you want people to understand? Why now?
Well, our culture has over the years turned away from the notion that evil's a real thing.
Okay, I agree.
We've come to think that the horrors of this world are happening because people are selfish and haters are simply mentally broken. And because of that selfishness and hate and mental brokenness, they do bad things.
Right, okay.
Nobody believes that any of these heinous acts can be caused by evil influence. But living here, seeing all the things that I've seen, I need everyone listening to know that the most heinous thing that people do to each other are simply just evil acts.
Okay.
They're caused by people who have allowed themselves to be tainted by that evil. They are either too weak or willing to give in and allow the wickedness to propel them to terrible acts. I mean, it's just worst possible cases. We see this evil manifest itself in other ways, like the monster I told you about. There's a clear manifestation of evil, and evil does exist.
Okay. But why say this now after all these years? Why does this incident propel you to say this?
Because these 5 terrible monsters, evil, they attacked 3 teenage kids. And those kids stood up to those beasts, and they prevailed. I'll sum it up just like this. Evil exists. We must fight it or be consumed by it.
Okay. Well, I think that's the perfect quote with which to end this interview. So, Elissa,
Yes.
I thank you so much for coming in here and telling your story, and I'll just end by simply reiterating what you just said. Evil exists, and we have to fight it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.